In this week's video, I want to talk about why I turned to herbalism when I was dealing with my hormonal cystic acne, as well as my journey in figuring out the herbalism world when it comes to cycle health and hormonal health. So if you're new here, hi, my name is Denise. I'm a cycle and sexual health educator, as well as a clinical herbalist with a focus on cycle health. And this is kind of how I got into this field in the first place. All right, so first off, let's set the scene and kind of give you some context into how I ended up getting this hormonal cystic acne that was pretty severe at the time. All right, so starting off from the very beginning, I got my first period when I was around 10-ish, give or take a couple of years, probably like a little bit earlier than that. And they were pretty normal. They were erratic, as is the normal as your cycles are starting to kind of get the rhythm of things. But they weren't really that painful, and I didn't really experience hormonal acne at all, actually, in my teenage years. Maybe like one or two here and there, but nothing crazy. Now, from a very young age, I knew that I didn't really want children. So I knew when I got into a more serious relationship, which was when I was around in my early 20s, I knew that I wanted to go on hormonal birth control to make it the most like efficient and effective form of contraception, which I did just that. So I got on hormonal birth control for its intended purposes. I went on two different forms. The first one being the Depo-Provera shot that I was on for about a year, and then switching to the next implant that I had in for like 2 years and a half. So altogether, I was on hormonal birth control for a total of about 3 years or so. And the first year that I was on the Depo-Provera shot, I noticed right away that I gained a lot of water weight within a couple of months, I would say. And then slowly over that year course, I started to get pretty bad hormonal cystic acne that kind of like went around my jawline, around my cheeks. And that was just something that I had to deal with. I also had a lot of spotting that just kind of was chronic and continuous. And I don't think I even like questioned that. It was just like, oh, I just have my period like nonstop now. That's cool. Fast forward to when I got the implant, the hormonal acne was just kind of still present. And if anything, it just kind of got worse and worse. And I didn't really know the cause. So I was kind of scouring the internet to what could cause this horrible acne. I didn't even know it was hormonal acne at the time. I thought it was like maybe I wasn't drinking enough water, maybe I needed to change my pillowcase like on a daily basis, or a plethora of other things, or if it was like that my skin was too oily, so I would start to use like more intense, harsh ingredients in my skincare, like alcohol wipes, and just trying like all the things. And it wasn't until I went onto this like obscure, I don't even remember what form it was at the time, that I was looking at like ingredients in like makeup that could cause breakouts, that someone mentioned that it wasn't the makeup that was causing their hormonal acne, it was actually that they were also on hormonal birth control. And that was kind of like a light bulb moment because I didn't really look at the side effects. I wasn't taught the side effects, of course. I wasn't like, they didn't tell me the side effects. Or if they did, it was kind of like a broad, like, this is what can possibly happen, and here's like a pamphlet kind of thing. And one of the side effects being acne. So I decided to get off of hormonal birth control, and I figured that getting off of the birth control would help my hormonal acne. It would just go away. And I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. It got so much worse. It got to the point where I didn't have a new breakout for only about like 5 days out of my full cycle. The rest of the cycle, I was getting new consistent breakouts every couple of days. And of course, these breakouts, because they were hormonal and cystic acne, they stayed a lot longer. So it was pretty bad. Over the next 3 years, I tried anything and everything people would recommend to kind of get rid of the hormonal acne, which I kind of at the time realized it was hormonal, but I really didn't know how to address it. So I was doing different diets, for instance. I did keto, I did vegetarian, I did vegan for multiple years to try to figure out if it was the dairy that was causing the acne, if it was the animal fats that was causing the acne, which, spoiler alert, you need fats to make these hormones. That's kind of like the building block is cholesterol. So me cutting these things out was probably not the best, and it probably made things worse. But I was trying hundreds, not even like exaggerating, hundreds of different skincare combinations. Once again, trying different chemical peels, going for like really intense facials and just anything and everything that would kind of help the chronic cystic acne that I had at the time. I also fell for things like detox. So there was like this, I don't even remember the brand it was, but I knew it was a detox tea with like a bunch of like different herbs. And this was kind of like my very first mini introduction into herbalism. Like not really, because it's more of a gimmick. because you don't need something to detox. You need to support your own internal detox, which I learned a lot more about herbs and like how to support like your liver, for instance, which is like your main organ of detox. But I also did fall from the very beginning into like this misconception that you need like a detox tea to help you detox these like quote unquote toxins from your body and that will help your hormones. And I spent a lot of money on that and it didn't do anything because that's not really how that works. So that was kind of like my mini somewhat introduction into herbalism, not really because they didn't really talk about like the herbs that were in these teas that they were selling. It was more like, oh yes, get these detox teas to cleanse your body. So that was kind of like the dark side I went into a little bit in my desperation to kind of fix my face. And then the person that actually introduced me into actual herbalism, funnily enough, was a dentist. So at the time, I was probably in my mid 20s and I had to get my wisdom teeth removed. So I went over to my home country of Colombia because my uncle is a dentist and he had a friend that does wisdom teeth removal. And long story short, after I got my wisdom teeth removed, he just kind of like gave me this like the doctor pamphlet paper thing and it had some like pain reliever and then it had like this word on there. And he gave it to me. He's like, all right, pick this up at the pharmacy, which was like the pain meds, and then go a couple of doors down and hand this to the lady. And I was like, okay. So I go down there, hand it to the lady, and it was like this little like plant shop, and she had like kind of like this with like dried herbs, but there was hundreds of them like across the wall. And she grabbed the plant, she put it like in this little like newspaper, and she was like, okay, here you go. Make a tea out of this, kind of swish it around your mouth. Try not to like do too vigorous because obviously I just had my wisdom teeth removed. Try not to be too vigorous with it and then like just spit it out. Turns out that was calendula. And the whole idea of them using it after like wisdom teeth and like mouth operations is that it helps the tissues kind of heal and repair themselves a lot quicker. So I thought that experience was really cool, and I kind of wanted to learn more about different plants and their like healing potential. Just how I started to go more into herbalism and plant medicine, and I really wanted to find out if maybe going this more like natural route would help. If there was like a specific herb that would help with my acne, like what do I need to do to get rid of the acne? That was like always what was on my mind 24/7. And if you've dealt with acne before, you know that it can be kind of all consuming. That's where it kind of was at the time. So I started to look on different online sources about like herbalism and hormone health and acne. And at the time, I didn't really get a straightforward answer. I got like a couple of herb recommendations, like things like Vitex or red raspberry leaf that kind of came up a lot in different searches, and I would try them and they would help a little bit, but not really, or at least not long term. And I really wasn't sure how to like research these herbs, like what exactly I was looking for, which is when I decided to like kind of take different courses on them and kind of dive deeper instead of just like the surface level of herbalism. And now after like I want to say like 5 years of studying herbalism now, I realized why it's so difficult to kind of find a specific herb to help with hormonal health. And now that I've kind of gone even further, so I studied herbalism for 5 years, and I've also studied a lot of cycle health. I had a whole certification on like just cycle health and anatomy. And kind of going on the other side of that, I realized why it's so difficult to look into herbalism for cycle health, why it's not so straightforward. And that is honestly because our cycles aren't very straightforward. They're not use this herb for the specific thing and expecting an outcome because that's not how our body works. Our body is so much more interconnected, and that's exactly how our cycle is. So when we're looking at cycle health, we're also looking at sleep quality. We're making sure that you're eating enough, that the food that you're eating is actually being absorbed by your gut microbiome, how's your stress levels, all of these different things that seem not related to like your actual cycle or hormonal health actually really are directly impacting it. So now switching over into the how I've worked with herbalism and different plants to help my hormonal health, the way I kind of went about it was through, of course, trial and error. That about 90% of the herbs that I'm working with, because I still need to support my hormonal health because of life and just like everyday stressors. I'm still constantly working with different herbs to kind of support my hormonal health. So 90% of the time when I'm like, oh, I'm using this herb for my hormonal health, 90% of the time that herb isn't specific for hormonal health. Or it wouldn't be like if you open up one of the herb books and you're opening up to like that specific herb, it's not going to say on there it's going to be good for your hormonal health. And that's because a lot of other aspects come into play. Once again, when we are talking about our hormonal health. Personally, for me, what I really focused on was making sure that I was getting good quality sleep. I wasn't sleeping enough. I thought I was, but we actually need like 10 hours of sleep depending on where we are in our cycle. I was definitely not sleeping as much, so I focused on different herbs to help me sleep better, different herbs to help digestion, to really make sure that I'm assimilating all of the food that I'm eating, really focused on stress. So, stress reduction, different herbs to help minimize stress or kind of buffer stress. Or in a different way that I've also used herbs is helping me wind down at the end of the day, not keeping up with the stress and anxiety of like, oh, I need to do this, and just like the list that is in your mind that's kind of like never ending, kind of making sure that that is turned off when I'm trying to get to sleep because a lot of that is like nervous system dysregulation that like as you're getting ready to fall asleep your brain just kind of keeps going and that is a little bit of like an internal stressor, so we also don't want that. Another way you can think about it is looking at key pillars or key areas that you want to focus on when it comes to using herbs or working with herbs for your hormonal health. So this is kind of like what I ended up coming up with. It kind of helps me keep on track of what areas I really need to focus on to support like overall cycle health. So this is what I call the 6 pillars of hormonal health. So the first one is body literacy. This is something that I didn't really learn about until more recently, and it has been honestly game changing to figure out what is causing the issue. Like if I'm getting more breakouts, it's like what's causing the problem, and looking at the root cause, which is overall just like hormone anatomy or like your cycle anatomy. So that's body literacy. So I highly recommend looking into cycle tracking and being able to get insights into your hormonal health, for instance having more time producing estrogen than you do progesterone, which could then over time lead to things like estrogen dominance, which could be causing the hormonal acne, which was my case. So kind of really understanding body literacy, and I do have a video that kind of like I've found multiple videos actually on like cycle tracking and like what that is. So you can definitely check those out. Next up is rest. So like I talked about making sure that you're getting good quality sleep and using herbs to help you get that good quality sleep. So some of the herbs that I've used to like help me get good quality sleep and kind of help me wind down at the end of the day, especially like taking it as like a bedtime tea is things like passion flower or skullcap or even chamomile have been really good to help me like wind down at the end of the day. The next pillar is being informed. So being informed about what products you're using and how that can impact your hormonal health. So some of the areas that I really looked into were things like menstrual products. So some of the menstrual products aren't the best or have fragrance or the materials of them aren't the best for your like microbiome down there, which it also has a microbiome. So being informed on that, also underwear, anything that comes into like contact down there can be a potential issue when we're using that long term and we are already struggling with like hormonal dysregulation. Reset. So reset is kind of what I decided to call anything that has to do with our nervous system. So that would be being able to wind down at the end of the day and not be in this heightened, aroused state, which once again, as I mentioned earlier on, is an internal stressor. So that could be things like chamomile, things like tulsi I've used as like just a chill, like a chill out tea at the end of the day. The next pillar is movement. So making sure that you are getting enough movement, which you wouldn't think has an impact on our hormonal health, but it really does impact. For instance, if we're sitting all day kind of on our butts and the pelvic area is stagnant, you want to be moving around so that blood flow can get to the pelvic area, which helps with like uterine contractions during our period, for instance. So we want to make sure that we are just moving for general health, which will also translate to our hormonal health as well. And if you're looking for herbs to kind of help like energize you if you kind of aren't in the mood to exercise, which I would say if you're not feeling in the mood to exercise, you might want to take a rest day and kind of listen to your body. But if you want something to kind of help like perk you up a little bit, maybe some of the mint family, so like lemon balm, peppermint, spearmint, something like that to kind of like help you get energized a little bit, but without, of course, pushing your body, which would then be an internal stressor. And the next one is nutrition, trying to get enough food, which a lot of us don't really think that we are under eating, but a lot of us are under eating, especially if we're like skipping breakfast and causing blood sugar spikes, which is an internal stressor. And then making sure that the quality of the food is as good as it can be, which I know can be a bit more complicated, especially as we talk about like economics and how much more expensive organic food is versus not. In which case, I would suggest looking at things like the Dirty Dozen, kind of like prioritizing different foods that would make a difference when it comes to like organic versus non-organic, which is like a whole other conversation in itself. But yeah, just making sure that you're getting enough food, enough good quality food, and that you are getting enough protein, fiber, and healthy fats, because those are the building blocks of our hormones. That is why I got into herbalism. As you can see, there is so many different ways that we can support our overall health, which is then how we then support our hormonal health. I couldn't have gotten rid of my cystic acne if it wasn't because I was looking at for my nervous system health, looking at my digestion, because all of these in turn impact my cycle. And I think it is so cool that plants and herbs are able to work in these ways with us. And that's why I ended up having this as like my career, because I am so passionate and I love to talk about this. So if that's left you curious on what cycle tracking is, then I recommend this next video that talks about what I look for when I'm tracking my cycle, just to give you kind of an introduction into what cycle tracking is and what kind of information you can learn and gain from tracking your own unique cycle. Because it's very hard to figure out what your own hormones need, what your own cycle needs, based on other people's experience and not so much your own cycle. So this gives you a very direct feedback into your own unique health. So I hope this information was helpful. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll be seeing you next time.